There's really never going to be another show like Stranger Things ever again, and the Duffer Brothers screwed up so badly with that ending that it sent the entire fandom into a psychosis to create the Conformity gate theory. Given how painful it's been seeing them give answers to plot holes through those disastrous interviews, we can't help but also get on that same anxiety-inducing bandwagon, because what do you mean you think Vecna didn't believe the party would ever reach the abyss? Now, we don't have answers to all these glaring plot holes, but there might be one thing we can help you with, and that's everyone wondering how come Vecna lost a tug-of-war with Derek at the edge of the cave when he had wrapped Holly's leg in his viney hands. More so, people have been complaining about just how weak Vecna seems to be in this season, especially compared to what a badass he was in Season 4. Well, the reason might just be bad writing, but you know what's easier to believe than that? A whimsical speculation backed by cold, harsh logic. So, without wasting another moment, let's discuss why Vecna's Mr. Whatsit form was so weak in the Stranger Things finale. Vecna has many forms, or should we say names, but they all uphold the true vibe he brings to the party. Jokes aside, we do know him by different names as he changes different forms and goes through different phases in his life through the Stranger Things universe. Henry, aka 1, aka Vecna, aka Mr. Whatsit, has proved himself as the baddest of villains ever since his introduction in Season 4. His impact in that season was so brutal that nobody even cared that the Mind Flayer was weirdly nowhere to be seen until the very end of the show. But regardless of everything, we have known Vecna to be almost invincible, right? Well then, how come he powered down so much this season on more than one occasion? Well, we'll come to that, but before we do, we want to take a moment to discuss how badly we were baited into believing that Vecna would receive a redemption arc after Noah Schnapp called him one of the most misunderstood villains of all time. Now, the part of the fandom who were lucky enough to watch the Broadway stage play, Stranger Things, The First Shadow, clearly understood how that could play out, and hence, the theories began cooking. But oh well, the disappointment of the supersized finale really pushed all our hopes and dreams for Henry's redemption arc right off a cliff. Although, that said, to give credit where it's due, Jamie Campbell Bower was absolutely phenomenal as Vecna throughout the entire course of the show. Even if the Duffers refused to flesh out Vecna's character in the latest season, we do get a glimpse of Vecna's Mr. Whatsit form going inside the cave to finally face his fears in order to recapture the 12 kids who escaped. But instead of chasing after them, he just stands there in a catatonic state as he witnesses the most traumatic moment of his life unfold in front of him. You can see a range of emotions flash across his face as Will also taps into the hive mind to realize how Henry became the Mind Flayer's first vessel. For a moment, he slipped back into being a human being as he felt scared, vulnerable, and desperate, seeing his 8-year-old self get shot in the hand by a strange man in the cave and then smashing his head open with a rock in self-defense. That wasn't even the worst part, because after Henry opened the briefcase that man was holding, he found a glowing stone which was indeed a piece of the Mind Flayer. As soon as he touched that stone, the wound on his left palm sort of absorbed it, and well, that's how he gets flayed by the Mind Flayer, who immediately shows a vision of itself as a dusty brown cloud and asks Henry to come looking for it. From that moment, Henry's eventual transformation begins. Even if the man he injured tried to warn him by asking him to resist the Mind Flayer's influence, the entity prevented it by acting through Henry and gouging the man's eyes out. Following this, Will tries his best to convince Henry how every heinous act he committed, starting with the cave, was never his fault. It was actually the Mind Flayer using him as a pawn. But as the show tries to convince us, he was too far gone. You could really see the pain in his eyes as he refuses to blame the Mind Flayer for manipulating him for decades and instead asks Will to leave him alone. At that point, every emotion he felt was truly human, because even if it was for a split second, he did realize just how badly the Mind Flayer played him. But we think his refusal to accept that came from Henry still feeling like that powerless little 8-year-old boy in the cave deep inside, and that's why he was just too far gone to turn back and join the heroes for a redemption arc. Now, if you've seen the ending after seeing the Broadway show, you might also find this ending a bit disappointing and heartbreaking. But amidst that, we notice something. So Henry's most naive form was shown during his origin story in the play, where he did have powers, but he was also actively resisting the Mind Flayer's influence. At this point, he was very much an empathetic human, and though he didn't have as many caring friends as Will Byers, Henry wasn't exactly evil. The First Shadow tells us that every bad thing Henry does is due to the Mind Flayer's overbearing influence, but after Dr. Martin Brenner tracks him down, things only get worse for him. Brenner pretty much becomes a catalyst in Henry going over to the dark side and fully embracing the Mind Flayer's influence. As Project Indigo begins with Brenner using Henry's blood to transfuse 10 pregnant women, it results in the birth of 10 kids with psychic abilities. Even if they weren't as powerful as Henry, they were a pale imitation of him, with 11 being the strongest and most like him. So, in a way, this was also a weak form of Henry, as he was now one, as Dr. Brenner called him. Years of abuse from Brenner, along with the Mind Flayer's influence, had filled him with rage, and during this period of time, he began to see the world as broken. It wasn't until Henry manipulates 11 to remove his power-suppressing chip in Season 4 of the Netflix show when we really understand his motive and his abilities. But then, before he could do any more damage after the massacre at Hawkins Labs, 11 banished him into the Abyss by opening a temporary gate to that alternate dimension in 1979. We're guessing it was the Mind Flayer that pulled him into the Abyss, but as we know, it's here Henry's physical transformation into Vecna begins. For years, Henry worked with the Mind Flayer to form a true symbiotic connection and become one. He apparently also gave shape to the floating dust particles of the shadowy entity to make it look more like a ginormous spiders, which Will Byers first saw in Season 2. It wasn't until November 6, 1983, when Henry began his master plan to reshape the world into the Mind Flayer's vision, but during these 4 years he spent with the entity in this hellish world, Henry evolved out of his human form and into the monstrous, vine-covered demon of the Upside Down that we see terrorized Max in Season 4. In the Abyss, Henry was disfigured by the Upside Down's toxic atmosphere, transforming into the humanoid, plant-like creature with elongated claws. His physical form is his most powerful form because, as Vecna, he could block off his human emotions and focus on exploiting his victims' trauma by digging into their minds. In fact, he sort of became a godlike entity as he controlled the hive mind and the entire dimension, which was just an extension of the hive mind. The only way to hurt Vecna, as we see in Season 4, was to either attack his physical body while his consciousness is also engaged in a fight, but by Season 5, he came back stronger, as after being seriously injured by the gang, Vecna rebuilt himself by becoming even more emaciated with a hardened, cracked, bone-like shell and more integrated vine and root structures, thus becoming a more powerful and almost skeletal being connected to the Mind Flayer. Even then, the party found a way to tackle him, as Will tapped into his mind to injure him, while 11 physically fought him inside the Mind Flayer's physical giant spider form, which too was beaten down by the rest of the gang. Now, coming to Vecna's Mr. Whatsit form, well, we might say that this is the most perfect version of Henry, and that's why it only exists in his mindscape. Mr. Whatsit is how Vecna truly sees himself, as a hero who's trying to save the world through a means of choosing the greater good. Not just that, this is also the most benevolent version. Manipulation is Vecna's strongest weapon, so it's not surprising he uses it on the 12 kids he kidnaps by luring them in with his Mr. Whatsit form. However, there's one thing that stands out here, and that's how kind and patient he seems to be. Before this, we've only seen Henry traumatize people, but Mr. Whatsit is a totally different side of him. Even when the kids do make mistakes, he reasons with them instead of going absolutely full Vecna on them. For starters, he did scare the living shit out of Derek by showing him a vision of his dead family with their eyes gouged out in order to force him to obey, but if this was Vecna in his lair and not Mr. Whatsit in Henry's mindscape, Derek would have been cooked, as Will had been when he was first kidnapped in the Upside Down. More importantly, we see Vecna physically pull Holly's body from falling down the abyss to the Upside Down after she fails to escape. But when Holly wakes up again inside his mindscape, Mr. Whatsit shockingly treats her with love and care, even though he had provoked the rest of the kids against her by now. Now, our theory here is that he might have different powers in his different forms. Because Vecna is his physical monstrous form, it's indeed the most powerful, but from what we've seen, Mr. Whatsit is the closest Vecna gets to being a human in his mind, and that's why he's also the weakest. That's exactly why he was scared to go into the cave, because there was still a human side of him that he was still retaining in the form of fear. That's also why it was so easy for Eleven to fight him inside his mind, because she was fighting his weakest form, so throwing him out of the window really was a piece of cake. Again, that's also why he used his illusion powers to vanish during the time Callie was trying to stab him, because even Vecna knew that his Mr. Whatsit form wouldn't stand a chance against Elle and Callie. So it makes sense why, after he chased Derek and Holly to the cave, he wasn't able to pull Holly out of the cave even after he got her leg with his viney hands, unlike his noseless physical avatar, who easily pulled her back from the Upside Down to the Abyss. Mr. Whatsit was the last semblance of humanity left in Vecna's consciousness, and that's exactly why he wasn't as powerful in his mindscape as he was in his physical form as Vecna. Having said that, this is really just a speculation, because the Duffer Brothers have very conveniently left everything up for interpretation. We hope this theory makes sense to you guys, but let us know what you think about it. Share your thoughts in the comments section down below.